the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
I'm announcing that HHS has become the decertification of Network for Hope, the organ procurement organization serving Kentucky and parts of Indiana. Federal reviewers found serious deficiencies in nearly 30% of the cases that they examined. We found patients placed on the organ donation pathway who should have never been there. We found cases with the donation process continued despite signs that patients were not appropriate organ donors.
The Drew Mariani Show on Relevant Radio.
To me, this is such a bizarre story. Of course, that was the very familiar voice of Secretary, the HHS Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and he was decertifying an organ procurement organization after the investigation found irregularities. You know, other words that are often used. Look, I don't know about you. Right now, I am an organ donor, and sometimes I have guests on, and they make me question brain death and all the rest of this. And I want to do what's noble. I want to do what's generous. But I also want to do what's right morally. And, you don't want your life taken prematurely. Dr. Father Tad Pacholczyk is going to be joining me in just a moment. We'll get his take on all this. But I don't know if you've checked the box on your driver's license to become an organ donor. If you did, you've chosen that even in death, your life might be a blessing to someone else. And, you might have a loved one that has survived and is alive today because somebody in a car accident or something else, decided they were organ donors. I think it's a beautiful act of charity. The church has long recognized organ donation as a noble and meritorious act when it's freely given, when it has informed consent, and only after, and this is the key, when death has been properly determined. You can go to your catechism. I go to it all the time. That's Catechism Entry 2296. You can read it there. But this trust, this sacred trust, depends on one thing above all else: absolute certainty that you are dead before those organs are recovered. That's why this story, to me, I want to bring it to you. I want you to be aware of this. This recent federal action has captured national attention. I don't know whether this flew under your radar. I'm always trying to bring to you news and issues and stories through the eyes of our faith, a moral look at this stuff, and this may be something you didn't hear about. HHS Secretary Kennedy, he began this process of decertifying the Network for Hope, and they're an organ procurement organization that serves Kentucky, also some of the surrounding regions. And what happened was these investigators found serious patient safety failures. That's how they worded it. According to the investigation, now listen to this. This is a number staggering to me. Officials reviewed 351 cases, 351, in which organ donations had been authorized but ultimately not completed. So they identified about 100 cases with concerning features, including dozens of these patients displaying neurological signs that were inconsistent with the organ donation criteria. And investigators concluded that at least 28 may not have been legally deceased. They might still have been alive when their organs when that preparation began. And the organization, of course, is disputing the findings. It's announced it will appeal the decision. So I want to be very just here and present both sides. But, the investigation raises, I think, a disturbing question about whether some patients were, evaluated appropriately, whether pressure existed to proceed too quickly in certain situations. I don't know how it all went down. But, when you hear a story like this, it can shake your confidence. And maybe you're wondering, man, should I still be an organ donor? My answer to that would be, don't let the failure of one organization rob others of the gift of life. Every year, thousands of people give their vital organs. They give this generous act, of organ donation after death, and 100,000 Americans remain on transplant waiting lists right now, hoping and praying that they might get that organ that they need. And if it's, I think, ethically done, with rigorous standards, I think it's a good thing. But we can talk to Father Tad about this, because is it too late once you're dead, to take that vital organ? This story raises questions about the fact that medicine is never just the whole thing. Well, really, this whole issue is not just about technology. It's about human dignity, and this is a tough decision. I just want clarity on it. So I've invited the senior ethicist at the National Catholic Bioethics Center to join me. You've heard him before. He's such a wonderful contributor. Father Tad joins me right now. Father Tad Pacholczyk. You can check him out at the ncbcenter.org or fathertad.com. Those are his websites. Father, good to have you back. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Drew.
So what's
Good
your take
story
on
you picked up on here? I think this one is generating some waves of interest, and I think a lot of people are glad to see a step like this actually being taken. In other words, we've had years of these types of reports kind of clandestinely appearing that, oh, there's a concern here, there's a concern there about the organ procurement organization. But now we actually see steps being taken to decertify. So that's kind of impressive to me.
Yeah, so let's talk about that if we could. Decertification. What exactly prompted the federal government to move toward declassifying this particular company organ procurement organization? Maybe they're an anomaly, or maybe this is happening in states all across the union. I don't know. That's why I wanted to look at this. And then maybe we can get into really how you determine if someone is dead and when you can take their organ, et cetera. And I'll open the phones too. Maybe you're the recipient of this. Maybe you got a positive story. Maybe you've got a concern. Father Tad will be with me here for the next 20 or 30 minutes. So feel free to dial in 888-914-9149 and join the conversation. So let's pick it up on that. What happened in Kentucky, and what are your thoughts about how common or uncommon this is?
Yeah, so I would say, remember, this is not just Kentucky. This Network for Hope that they're decertifying actually also extends into Southwest Ohio and part of West Virginia.
Right.
So this organization has a fairly broad sweep. So what happened in general terms is that you have what's called an OPTN, or an Organ Procurement Transplantation Network. And this is a network, an organization that provides national oversight, okay, not just for one region of the country, but for kind of everybody. And they had got word that there were some concerns at this particular organ procurement organization in Kentucky, Ohio, and West Virginia, working in that area. So they did an investigation, and this investigation did seem to uncover some real concerns. This was even under the Biden administration. But then it was permitted not to go too much further. There was some, other review that followed, but basically tabled the whole thing. And then Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and the HHS reopened the case. And they felt, this maybe does deserve a second look. And indeed, when they scrutinized the data very closely, you mentioned in the opener the kinds of problems they found. Roughly 30% of the patients,
that's crazy.
They had neurological signs indicating they really weren't dead. They were still alive, and wasn't appropriate to begin organ donation. And yet, here they were being prepared to donate their organs.
Wow.
So, it's amazing. And this set off some alarm bells under the HHS, under this new administration, and I'm glad to see that. And I think now the question becomes, is this symptomatic or emblematic of other OPOs that have oversight for other regions of the country? Are there similar problems? And we don't know that yet. I don't want to overgeneralize too quickly. I think we have to wait for the data to be collected. But among the corrective measures that they are starting to require, they're saying you have to collect data about any safety-related stoppages when it comes to, donating organs. And you have to also record data whenever there's a staff member, a doctor, a nurse, somebody who says, oh, there's a problem here and we don't want the transplant to go forward. That has to be reported to the regulators. I guess in the past it wasn't always reported. Right. And, then there's also a new push to kind of heighten transparency about this information and about the whole donation process, both to families that are involved and to hospitals. And I think that's also key. The families need to know really what's going on, sometimes in a little more detail than I think they have sometimes been given in the past. They're given the bad news. Oh, we're so sorry to tell you your loved one is gone, is brain dead, and, wouldn't he have wanted to donate organs? It's a little bit of kind of soft sell sometimes, at least in cases that I've worked with. Sometimes that happens, not always. Again, I don't want to overgeneralize, but this process needs transparency for the whole family, so that, because they're involved in this is a loved one, and they need to understand what their loved one is signing up for, and to be sure that everyone is on the same page to the extent that that's possible.
So let me do this. I know Martha's been holding in Kingston, Pennsylvania. We got Elliot in Monterey. You two, I definitely want to get you on. I have to take a break, and we'll take all your calls on the other side, but they were the first two in. I want to make sure I get them to Father, and they've got different perspectives here. Brain death. Before I have to take this break, let's just clarify this. I mean, how are you determined if you're dead? It's that 30% of the cases with these people, showed that some of these potential donors may not have actually been dead at the time of the organ procurement, or at least they showed neurological signs compatible with organ donation. Could you explain what brain death is? And this is the big controversy. A lot of that line has moved over the years. When a person is actually dead. How do we know somebody's dead, and how much time do we have between that brain death and the extraction of that organ? Because I know after a certain period of time with no respiration or anything else, some of those organs can really be compromised. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, and it actually varies with the organ, Drew. In other words, certain organs are a little bit more hardy in being able to survive a period without oxygen. For example, kidneys. Kidneys tend to be pretty robust, but some other tissues like liver and so on, perhaps a greater sensitivity, shorter period of time that you need to get in there and procure the organ. So, that's a sort of organ by organ assessment. Same with the heart. If you're actually doing a heart transplant, you're going to have a limited period before the lack of oxygen causes irreversible damage. So your broader question here, and you're saying, well, it seems like the line on determining death has shifted. I'm not sure if it's shifted as much as I would say the techniques that are being applied to make the determination that somebody has already died, those techniques have indeed been changing with time.
Gotcha.
And I like to think they've been evolving, in a more positive direction. And the real challenge here is that we got to make sure the people who are declaring death are doing all the required tests, and that no corners are being cut here, because sometimes that's the exact level on which the problem pops up. And I think in what the HHS found here, that's the level of it, that you did have practitioners who were saying, well, maybe we don't need to do this test or that test, or, it looks good enough, it's close enough, good enough for government work, as the old saying says. Well, it's not. If we're dealing with matters of life and death, we must carry out due diligence here, and no two ways around that.
That was the Best of the Week on Relevant Radio. The best way to listen to the Best of the Week is on the Relevant Radio app, free and always free. Download and share the #1 free Catholic app today in the App Store.